New York Times bestselling author Pierce Brown is back with. Well, he's back with his with his sequel to Iron Gold, the second series following the Red Rising trilogy. Dark Age opens with Darrow exiled from the very republic he founded through bloody revolution. He's an outlaw waging a rogue war on Mercury, but is he still the hero in his quest for vengeance? Meanwhile, Lysander, the displaced heir to the old empire, plans plans to unite the society remnant in Solar Republic and must prove his loyalty on the battlegrounds. On Mustang, Luna works behind the scenes to save both her republic and her husband, although she may not be able to save both. Pierce Brown's stunning ability to weave myth and history into this alternate world in all its complexities is on full display in his latest installment. Without further ado, Pierce Brown.
So I'm trying to liberate myself here. Okay, because I wander. Thank you all for coming out. Damn, I did not expect this big of an audience. This is awesome. Sorry about you schmucks in the corner back there. All right, so can I get a show of hands, just so we know when we get to the Q&A section who to throw books at? Who has read Dark Age completely? Oh, all right. Every other place has been like 3 people. I gave you all too much time. All right, so keep your hands up. Now, take a look at these people. When the Q&A session happens, if they start going towards a spoiler, give them a good old kidney pump, okay? Right here. Severo shot. All right, now, how many people have read Iron Gold? All right, wrong question. How many people have not read Iron Gold? Shame. Works every time. Do we have any priestess? Nothing? We'll have to introduce him to it. We can do that, I think. Okay, does anyone have bells? Or do we have any priestesses here to follow the people who have not read Iron and Gold around? No, all right. So this we'll just get into it because I like a long Q&A section because I believe the conversation's more fun because you're going to be reading about 800 pages of me babbling on and on and on. So you don't need more of that now. So this book series, this book was a mammoth for me. It was harder than any of the others, mostly because of the scope, but also because of the intimacy. And that's what I was trying to do in this book. Is almost have I thought of myself kind of as the eye of Sauron, looking at things like popping around and that's what's so much more fun about this series because I get to do the multiple POVs and see different aspects of the world. With Ephraim, we have the inner workings of the underbelly of the world, but also seeing the side of the rising that we hadn't really understood in the first 3 books, and we wouldn't understand if we had Darrow's POV. That sort of disaffection, the disillusionment, the rejection. It's because he worked for the rising for a long while and then turned away from it because it wasn't delivering what it promised. Then we have Lyria, who's somewhat crushed under the boot of all these giants walking around. And that was a key POV for me to embrace when going into this series because it tries the reader, it tests the reader, because we're used to dealing with this, war god, right? This living Messiah who has united all these people and can almost change a scene with simply, by murdering someone. Lyria, on the other hand, is a trickier character because I'm trying to show the birth of agency, the birth of how someone who is small begins to understand that they matter as well, but also showing the disillusionment she has with the rising because it was all these things she promised. And she was promised by the rising, promised by Mustang speeches, promised by the political apparatus, and by the propaganda wing of the rising. And I think that's something we're all familiar with in our life, the things that we're promised, right? Especially I think every generation has it, but the generation that came out of school during the recession, I think felt it very acutely. I mean, I came out right when Lehman Bros collapsed, and I worked for free for a year and a half, I had 2 degrees, and all I was doing was delivering coffee, but hey, that's the world, right? And so it teaches you valuable lessons, just like Lyria has learned in the first book, and hopefully we use in the second. And then we have Lysander. This side is not as correct. All right, we get a little more fair-minded over here. All right. Y'all have read too much of Dark Age. But Lysander is someone who is, in many ways, a product of his environment. He's this person that believes in the myth of Well, the gold political machine, the myth of the origin of gold, much as a Roman would have believed in the myth of Romulus and Remus or Aeneas coming, from fallen Troy to found Rome. He believes in this noble idea. Now he sees how it's fallen by the wayside. He sees how it's been broken basically under its own evolution of plutocracy. It might be a great idea, and I think it's a great idea, the society, because it was based on Plato's Republic, one of my favorite books that I read when I was like 15. I'm sure most of us did in some part of school, but none of us remember shit about it, right? The thing is, I revisited it when I was 21, I believe. 21 at the same, yeah, that's how I felt when I was reading it when I was 15. But I revisited when I was 21 and I started seeing how interesting it was, because I think we understand now, as we've seen, well, we have more history behind us than the Greeks did. We have more history behind us than the Romans did. And we've been able to see how whatever political ideology you have, whatever political ideology you try to impose upon a society, it inevitably changes. The application is not necessarily theory. Socialism, communism, democracy, all great ideas, but all have to fight the idea of plutocracy of wealth, of concentration and ossification of the political machine because 10 people rule it or 20 people rule it. And so that's kind of the evolution that the gold society has gone through. And Lysander is staring that in the face, and he saw how it failed. And so he's trying to do something different. Now, does that make him right? Does it make him wrong? Well, you can decide it. Y'all have. Y'all might not. But anyway, without further ado, I'd like to get into the Q&A section. Now, please, let's not have crickets here, so thrust your hands up in the air. This is my way of stalling for time. There we go. You can just say it. I'll repeat it.
Who for you has been the hardest character to write about? From their POV, who is the most difficult as far as the evolution goes, from one to now? Who has been just the hardest to write from?
Well, in many ways, Darrow was the hardest in terms of continuing to have different things to say with him and not showing the same rise and fall arc. That internal arc is really important, how he starts the book often rough, then eventually overcomes something, faces new obstacles, and I didn't want to repeat that. So he's often really tricky, but I think Mustang was the most difficult, mostly because she's existed almost as a myth, kind of this projection in Darrow's eyes. And Darrow has a tendency to lift the women he loves up on pedestals. He did it for Io, right? And then after she died, sorry, spoilers, there's going to be. After, it's 30 pages in, I know, I literally got yelled at the last, it was in Orlando, and I'm like, all right, don't even start with me. But he lifts people on pedestals, but then in the two books, he starts seeing the evolution of her character, right? Starts seeing more about why she did it, how she did it, and the fact that maybe it wasn't as noble as she wanted it to be because of all the different personality traits at play to making that decision. Same with Mustang. Darrow has this projection of what she is, and really we've only explored her character through his POV. A bit with Lyria, a bit with Ephraim, somewhat as asides, Lysander to a degree, but these are all people that don't really understand her. Even Darrow, who loves her, because I don't think we can truly understand someone. You have a high idea about them, heuristic, right? And you can understand a portion of them. But once we're in Mustang's POV, we're dealing with something different because that's not even a real character. We're actually seeing Mustang's idea of herself. But what's interesting about her is she's much more self-aware than even Lysander is. She's the most self-aware person I've ever written. So how does she get into trouble? How do we create tension with someone who is so intelligent, so knowledgeable, and also so skilled in interpersonal relationships that she's not going to make mistakes, not going to be pig-headed, not going to, just go invade a planet like Darrow. I mean, Darrow's like, one chapter he's, in the dirt, and then all of a sudden he's like, I call for an iron rain. Mustang's like, hold up, do we have the logistical support, And so it's tricky because she's much more showing the gears of operation, much more showing the political glad-handing that goes on. And it was trickier to do because not only from a plot perspective of how do you make her chapters interesting, but how do you make her at war with herself? Because any good character, in my mind, should be. There should be some sort of dissonance between their actions, what they must do, what they want to do, and what they dream about doing, And that tug of war is really fun with characters because Darrow's is pretty obvious and kind of binary, really. But Mustang's is much more informed and malleable by the things going on around her. She's realistic, but also a romantic because she has this, built-in humanism about her, built-in, I guess, sense of humanity, which is what Darrow fell in love with, right? And it's why she's such a good character, and you kind of trust her, although my best friend doesn't. He still thinks Mustang's the jackal somehow. Yeah, I know. I'm just like, I'm not sure how that works, but he's like, no, it's all a trick. He's gonna kill Darrow, Like, well, she's really doing the slow game here. But I think Mustang would be the short answer, and that was the long answer back there. Yeah. All right, next question. Let's go right there.
Hey there. I remember when I first saw you about 5 years ago in South Carolina. There was maybe like a dozen people there. It was right after Golden Sun had came out.
There were more than a dozen. There was like 13.
I was about to say I like counted that. But since then, the fan base has just grown exponentially. How has that been, and has that affected your writing at all?
Well, here's the thing. So I went to South Carolina to do this, I guess, little signing. What was the event there? Do you remember? So, all right, here's a little sad thing that happened. My dog of 12 years had just died the day before. And I know, and I came out there. But the day I got there, and I had 13 people there. One of them gave me this triptych of my dog with pictures of when I first got him, when I was holding him, and then, later on. And that's like when just having that few people, and the book, I don't think only Red Rising was out at that time, but someone who was already that in touch with what was going on with me. And oh, that was you? Wait, who? Did you bring me the dog pictures? Oh, he's pointing at you like you did, and I feel really bad if you did. All right, we're gonna say you didn't, and it was someone else. Did you? Well, they framed it. Oh, okay. Well, thank you to your brother then. So anyway, they were already so in touch. So that's kind of how this fan base has been. With each book successively, it's grown. But there's always been this sense of community about it, which has been really lovely to me. Now, as it gets bigger, there's been some other elements coming up, which is a little annoying because they're, they weren't there from the start. They criticized, but it's okay. But that community has been really nice to see grow with me, and it's been really rewarding because I get to see people 5 years in a row, and so there's a certain responsibility because when I embarked on this new series, what I didn't want it to feel that I was trying to stretch something beyond its natural length. Like I was just doing a cash grab, right? Which I was. No, I'm kidding. But it's like I had to find. I pushed Random House away at first until I knew that what I wanted to do with this story because I felt a certain obligation to the fans. Because I think we've all seen. I think we've all seen stories that continue on, and as they go later on, they denigrate the acts that were done in the initial one and undermine the entire importance of the initial trilogy of Star Wars. Sorry, I'm just gonna be throwing Molotov cocktails up here. But that I feel like is endemic to sequels. They a lot of times just don't know how to make the same story matter, so they instead up the stakes and then change like kind of they don't change the formula, but they change the characters and then demean the first characters, and the actions they made don't make sense because then all the people that died, all the sacrifices they were made. What was it for, right? So I don't want to do that with this book. And I understand with Iron Gold, there's a bit of disillusionment going on, right? But that's the whole point of the book is the disillusionment, the challenging of the initial trilogy, the challenging of that patriotic zeal of, all right, violent rebellions at work. But, we've seen Arab Spring, and that's only the recent one. And that was what sort of kind of started the fire inside my head of looking at what happens when you remove a strongman, what happens when you create a power vacuum. And so, I found my way into this new story, but I was really hesitant because I didn't want to betray the trust of the readers and betray the point of the original trilogy. So that's a long way of answering. It feels sort of responsible to the people that were there from the beginning.
Will the ghost of Cassius kind of stick around? Sorry, spoiler alert.
It's like AT-AT arm up here.
I feel like Lysander is a little haunted.
Yeah, Lysander is haunted, but I think we've seen the ghosts of many characters hang around. I mean, Io continues to affect Darrow's decisions, not as much in this new trilogy because he's 10 years removed, but I think the characters, the specters of the past continue to haunt them and inform their character, right? I mean, Pax has continued to be mentioned throughout the series. The Telemonuses still feel it very acutely. I think that Apollonius Avalii Wrath clearly still thinks about Tactus to a degree, right? And so, yes, I think that Cassius will always be hanging around in one way or another. All the way in the back, yeah.
One from over this side, real quick.
All right. 1 second, buddy. And then it's like, yeah, I like your attitude.
Hey. You ever see yourself doing prequels? Because I'd love to see the Obsidian Rising.
Oh, the darker vault. I don't know. It's tricky because you know how it ends, right? It's very tricky. So I'd have to find my way in. I'd have to find what themes I'm exploring that are different from this. It can't just be a different. It just can't just be different action set pieces. It has to be, and it can't be the same rise of another character. It has to be a different theme I'm exploring in a different point. So I might find my way in, and I want to do prequels, but I gotta make sure that I have ammunition for it. I think that the Dark Revolt would be interesting. I think that the Conquering would be interesting, seeing it from a human perspective, because I just want to see that Indian emperor when a 7-foot gold comes into his office and cuts him in half. He's like, oh my god, And so I think that there's a lot of themes you can play with, especially in the Conquering. Plus, there's one character I really want to explore, John Merrywater. Who was the American, was he Major? I think he's a Major, who led a mech battalion to attack Luna when the Earth was falling. And it's like he's on his own with 5,000 guys. And it's like, that would be really fun as like a standalone book. So there's a lot of different mediums. I think every story deserves its own, every story has its own medium. It might not all be books for some of this stuff. So I'll be exploring different options. And fortunately, the more readers I have, the more options I have to explore. Oh, right there.
So I don't want to do spoilers for Dark Age, but the question is,
Are you going to be really cryptic about it?
sort of, were you aware of how much you were going to break your readers with this book? And at the same time, and I say this as someone who read the book in about an evening and didn't, it was a bad night.
Yeah.
It was a rough night. And then my other part of that question, though, is...
So did you cry most 1/3 of the way through, 2/3 of the way through, or at the end?
About 66% of the way through, I tweeted something that just went, Dark Age made me go, what the hell, with a gif.
Yeah.
But my other half of the question is then how, when you're telling a story that dark, how do you still find that moment of hope so readers don't want to just cry the rest of the night into their pillow?
Well, I think it's a balancing act. So yeah, I knew what I was doing to a degree. Mostly because that's how I stay young. I bathe in the tears of online pleas, screeds, begging, Mostly it's because how do I say this? There's a lot of promises made in Iron Gold, a lot of trust based on, because, Iron Gold is a lot of ends leading to something, right? It's a lot of things being woven together. And there's definitely climaxes within Iron Gold, but it's really promising a solar war. It's promising insurrection. It's promising political upheaval. And so Dark Age had to fulfill that. So it was always structured to be like that. Now, in the writing itself, I almost died writing it. So I was like, no, I like a lot of this. I never wrote at night, and then this one I wrote almost all at night. Not like from some metaphorical reason, mostly because I was just procrastinating all day. And then like night would roll around and be like, oh, I'm too guilty to go to bed. And so then I'd be up all night. And so like it was written with bouts of insomnia, like, all over the place. Like in one room, I used to write like, everywhere in my house. And then I just made this my dark room of darkness, and I had all these like drawings up. So it was a very different writing experience for me. And I think that part of that claustrophobia, part of that I would say, the part of that psychological claustrophobia that I endured for, I guess, the 9 or 10 months when I was actually writing it was put into the book. And it's funny how books end up mirroring kind of your internal psyche. So I suppose that writing the stuff affected me too. But I think that what's different about this series is I spend more time making the big moments earned instead of making it all kinetic. And so it's that degree of intimacy and then scope I get to play with, which is a lot of fun for me. And so everything matters more, including the deaths. And so that was a lot harder in this book to do, mostly because I know what it's like to have a character that's awesome and then not be able to have him in any more scenes. And this is strictly from like, an architect perspective of like, oh, it's so, like, it used to be so fun to have Tactus's voice in a scene, because he could bring that levity. He could bring that, mildly schizophrenic, rapey vibe, because Tactus is a complicated creature. Someone named their kid Tactus, and I'm like, are you sure? But I also met a little Cavax, and he almost came out with a little beard, so that would have been great. But for me, I'm wandering at this point because I haven't made up my mind about it because I only finished the book about 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago. And so I turned it, like we pushed the deadline twice, and then I was like rushing to finish it, and I asked my editor, what happens hypothetically if I don't meet this deadline? Long pause. And then I was like, but I mean, I'm not going to. And she's like, that's very good, Pierce, So being a writer is funny because, I hated school and now I've just signed up for a life of homework, And yeah, that's my opinion.
All right, so we're going to take a question from the nosebleed seats real quick.
Where are you?
Yeah, what's going on, bro?
Hey, man.
I have a confession. I just recently got hooked on these books.
Where are you? Hold on.
So I'm on the third one. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I saw the top of your dome.
Yeah, the brother in the back, bald head.
Hey, man.
So I just recently got hooked, so I'm on the third one. So I don't really know what any of y'all are talking about, but...
Good. No. This is good.
Yeah, so all this over...
So the spoilers slide off. You're Teflon.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we're just going to take it back from me. My guy was Ragnar, so that's my man. And... I'm not gonna. I guess I can't spoil anything for any of y'all, but that was my guy. So, what was your inspiration behind Ragnar? Like, when you came up with the character, how did you come?
Ragnar was not. Ragnar was planned because. All right, this is funny, and you're gonna hate me more. Ragnar was planned because I had Pax as a character, and I'm a big fan of the movie Mighty Ducks 2. And I wanted 2 Bash brothers. And so all I wanted was 2 big guys making a wrecking crew. Unfortunately, have you guys heard of my Hat of Death? All right, some of y'all haven't. We're going to explore this. All right, it's back in my hotel room. I keep it away from signing so people don't destroy it. So I was reaching the point in the first book where Pax perishes. Sorry. And so I tore up all, but the thing is I needed to kill a character and I wasn't sure who it was going to be. But keep in mind, at this time, I'd written 6 books. I'd faced 160 rejections from agents. No one's reading this book. I know this. Everyone knows this, but there is no everyone because it's just me, And so I didn't know who I wanted to kill, and I also wanted to explore the theme of the capriciousness of the jackal. His cruelty is his randomness, and basically he just goes for the pain jugular. And so I took all the names except for Darrow and Mustang, and that's including Severo. I put him in I wrote him down, cut him on a piece of paper, put him in the hat, and then I drew out the name, and it was Pax. Now I looked around, and I'm like, I could just put it back in. But I'm like, oh, no one's gonna read anyway. Yeah. So I'm like, I executed him with the jackal. And it was interesting because, and sucked, but I knew it was right because Pax was literally the only character I had a plan for because I don't outline. But Pax, I knew I wanted to do the Bash Bros thing because I'd been in some 90s nostalgia flicks lately. And I'm like, well, I'm going to capture that tone. So I'm sitting there with like a yellow legal pad like, oh, I need that, And then I killed him. And then Pax was supposed to, marry Avi, the pink, and be friends with Ragnar. And Ragnar was going to break onto the bridge, and then it was supposed to be Pax and Severo and Darrow that went through the viewport. And I know. Yeah. It's fun, isn't it? Yeah. And my mom, when she's reading Red Rising, she just set it down and was like, where did you learn this? I think she thought she failed as a parent. So Ragnar, I knew that I wanted the Obsidians to have a voice, but I wanted someone who had the weight of all his sins upon his back. I mean, the amount of people that he'd killed, that he was treated like chattel slavery because he was sold by part of his clan to then protect their independence on the poles, and sold by his mom and the women of their clan, which created that interesting dichotomy between the men and women in the Obsidian culture, which I explore more in Dark Age. And so Ragnar was meant to be this kind of perfect soldier, but, a little bit on the older end of his career, who had been used as a gladiator, who had been sold off, who had seen many of his brothers and sisters die, and who had been forced to kill his own people in fights. And I wanted Darrow to meet that person who was like his almost similar to him and where his life would have gone if Darrow had aged in the mines. So that was kind of my projection for it. And so I knew that that Darrow had to find someone he could trust. And when he met Ragnar, I think that was a big moment for him because he trusted him more than he even trusted Severo in terms of how he knew him. And he told him in that locker right before they're going on the mission. And I think that was one of Darrow's biggest leaps, leaps of faith. And then that scene with Mustang, Ragnar, and Darrow in the tunnel, proved it right. And I love that. So anyway, he was a fun character to explore, but that's kind of the origin for him. All right. I promised this guy back here one, so then no, we can do you. It's like, he just shout it out and I'll repeat it. Sure. So what inspired me to do the perspective of different characters besides Darrow? One, I didn't want to be bored writing it. And I mean that very sincerely. Like, I didn't want to repeat it. And I didn't want it to be one of those thriller books, that 25 Tales of Alex Cross, you know what I mean? Because then, Darrow can't die. Darrow is immortal because he has perfect plot armor. And so I'm not promising anything. But there's a lot of different reasons that it's just boring to write one character. One, because there's only a certain amount of plot arcs and themes you can explore with a character who is as dynamic and violent as him. But also because I thought that having 3 more books with him would reject the central thesis of these books, which is that the small people matter. And so I wanted to explore the people that had been crushed under his boot as he became basically this juggernaut. Because these books are about upturning status quo. They're about exploring the options of disagreeing with the authority, right? And Darrow is the authority in this one. So how is that interesting just to see, if we just saw Darrow's POV, we just see almost like a King David fall. But we've seen that. That's archetypal. Instead, I wanted to see 3 people that he had affected, indirectly. And directly to a degree with Lysander, right? But for me, it's the idea that in Iron Gold, there is no antagonist. That's what makes the book a little hard to read and frustrating at times and disillusioning, right? Because there's no antagonist except for Darrow. Darrow is the only antagonist in 3 of the POVs. All of them kind of key in on him. He's fucked their life up, right? So the question I'm trying to pose to myself is, by the end of this series, where do those 3 people stand? Will they have come to the rising? Will they have found that the dream of Io is true and right when it's being tested like this? If we just have platitudes and we don't test them, then what good are they, right? If they buckle. And that's how the society started. The society started as something beautiful. It started as something interesting, and then it buckled under pressure to necessity. So I wanted to see if the Republic would do the same through these 3 characters. But great question.
Hi, I just finished the book this morning, so I'm a little raw still.
Yeah, I'll stay over here.
But I was really interested when you mentioned like the alternative that Pax could have taken Ragnar and stuff. So that just brought up the question to me, like, what is like what's your biggest regret with like taking a plot point? Like, what is like where do you have the most FOMO for, like, I wish I took that path that you just can't go back down anymore?
Well, that's a great way of saying it. It's not the regrets because wherever you go, you get to where you are, and I'm kind of happy where we are. But it is FOMO, and I think it might be, there's so many. God, I'm just cataloging all the faces, and it's like, they're all guilt tripping me. It's like... It's like that Game of Thrones advertisement, all the faces on the wall. Why did you do this to us? I would say maybe Io, because it would have been interesting to see if she and Darrow would have agreed as they went forward. And I think that while Antigone inspired this story, and Antigone is interesting because it's a 25 to 100-year-old story about a girl, disagreeing with authority. And it's amazing that it's resounded this long, right? But she's not portrayed purely as a martyr within it. They show the duality of her character, perhaps even a third dimension, but they show through Creon. So I'll pose Antigone to you. Antigone basically takes place in the aftermath of a civil war in the city of Thebes. Antigone, one of the titular character, is the sister of one of the rebels. Basically, 2 of her brothers fought in the war. One of them died. It was the rebel that died. And the man who put her brother down was a guy named Creon, who was just trying to protect his city. He said that he made a decree that no one could bury the traitors. No one could bury the people that gave them this civil strife. Antigone wanted to give her brother burial rites that were according to their religion. And so she basically, everyone knew she was going to bury them. It wasn't a surprise. And Creon warned her, and she was actually engaged also to Creon's son. So everyone was warned. Yeah, come on. It's 2,500 years old. But yeah, I've actually gotten that too, which is crazy. But so Antigone was warned by several people, even by her sister, and pleaded to not be so. They pleaded with her to not be so headstrong, and she did it anyway. So, but I look at that as not necessarily romanticizing her martyrdom, not romanticize. Oh, by the way, she was killed because she buried him. That was the promise, and Creon said he would go through with it, and lo and behold, she was killed. But they don't pose it simply as a martyrdom thing. It's sad, yes, but they also look at it from the side of hubris and the idea of why was she so strong-willed about this when there were other alternatives, when she could have done other options that were given to her by her sister, by Creon himself, by her husband or her fiance. So what made her do that? What was that almost, Romeo and Juliet pig-headishness, right? And so Io would have been really fun to get to explore that instead of retroactively doing it through Darrow's POV. Now he discovers this mentally a bit because his mom never liked Io, but Darrow wouldn't even hear that, right? Because to him, even though she was more complex than he remembered when he was 16, is still this person that he would protect with his life and her reputation as well. But seeing her, I still get to explore her, obviously, because you see the perversion of her dream. You get to see people using her name, almost like the way people use God's name, to excuse actions. And so I think that it would have been really interesting to see her reflection on that, and if she would have gone the direction of the Red Hand, or the direction of the Sons of Ares, or the direction of the Rising. So that would have been fun. But then again, we wouldn't have a book then, so.
Your brain is amazing, by the way. So is your world creation.
My
It's
braid?
phenomenal. Your brain.
Oh, I was like, what braid? Did someone braid my hair?
No, but my question is, your combat. The scenes are graphic and brutal in my head anyway. But
in mine too.
I don't know what inspired you, or what was influential in creating those scenes, like the fight scenes and how gruesome they are. But
yeah, confluence of things. I think it's a lot of the inspiration comes from things I've seen, and then me not necessarily trying to emulate it, but disagreeing with it. Oh, no, I'm just exploring the question fully. It's basically, so you see things and then you think, oh, they did that wrong, some way that I disagree with. For instance, sword fighting, if there is a plausible missile alternative, and so that's how I kind of created the balance of the weapons. So first off, it was trying to create the balance of weapons and how I could get them to actually be able to use swords, and to make it plausible. So in everything, there's a check and balance in every weapon in the Red Rising universe, and that's because I don't want people to be like, well, why didn't they just use the eagles, So, fortunately, I had that in the back of my mind the entire time. Like, why don't they just use nukes? Well, there's reasons, And so, once you have that framework, it's kind of like, I think Matrix is one of the best science fiction movies ever made, but also one of the best fighting movies, because the first one. Because you know the rules, right? You know the rules, they're weird rules. They can be any rules. You can do any rule you want in a story. It can be ridiculous as long as you don't break them later on, or introduce a new quirk, or slip through the cracks of the rules to get your character out of a situation. As long as you function according to the rules, it's kind of that Chekhov's gun thing, right? Show a gun early, you can use it later. But it's using that rule framework, and so long as you don't break that by going into light speed directly at, a big battleship, thereby fracturing the rules of the Star Wars universe. I'm kidding. But no, it's that sort of thing. It's that sort of thing, because I feel like you have to be able to see it when it's not a stressful situation, when it's not, on the brink of battle to save the hero. You have to see the option. For instance, Darrow getting shut down at the academy, when he was going to launch himself into the spaceship. You knew he was going to do it later, right? You knew he was. But it's interesting because then you get to layer that, because the reason they shut him down is the same reason that Darrow is actually able to beat them, because they're not kamikazes. Golds are not kamikazes. And Darrow was, and they don't don't know how to fight those tactics. And it's because they would turn it down because that math didn't work out. There's like a 10% chance it would work, right? And so they wouldn't do that. So then you get to use that thematic structure basically in a battle and say, oh, will they shut them down? Because thematically, of course they would, which then shows their arrogance. They're also their desire to live, which is then basically endemic in their society because they can live to 130 years old or more, right? Who wouldn't want to live a long time? So it doesn't make you as brave in battle, which then differentiates between the iron golds and the pixies and then even the regular golds. So it all kind of streams together. So I look at the battles as sort of how do I say this? It's a Venn diagram of all the different parts of the world. And that tiny sliver in between is the battles, because you get to show the themes, you get to show the character arcs kind of clashing, you get to cut some short and kill the idea of destiny or cut short plot arcs. And it's that crucible where people get tested, where a guy you hear is always brave and he runs. It's fun. So I think about it like very intensely like that. And then I base the battle based on that. I do the tactics based on what I'm trying to express. So I basically reverse engineer it. And because I don't outline, right? So instead I look at what am I trying to say? What's the point of it? If there's violence in a book, I think that it should be for a reason. Either it changes the plot, or it changes a character, or it's thematic. And if you're not doing those things, then it's just shock value, or it's just kind of smutty, right? And I'm not trying to do hostile here, like cutting people's Achilles tendons for no reason, And I think that it's really important to make it resonate on many different levels and not just show it, because otherwise you get bored. And I think the reason you pay attention to the tactics is because you know the things that are at stake, and you know the characters are vulnerable. And it started as Capture the Flag, right? It's basically Capture the Flag. That's why I did the Institute. It was Lord of the Flies, Capture the Flag. And I loved Capture the Flag as a kid. It was so fun. I was that annoying kid that was like, all right, you go left, you go right. Guys, where are you going? No, my plan, And so I had stratagems, and no, we all hide on this side because they're all arrogant. They think they're fast, so they're all gonna blitz us, trying to be dramatic heroes. And then we capture all of them. There's a poor little kid back there who can't run because he's wise, but he still can't defend a fortress, can he? So it's like, I did that when I was 9, and I loved that because I grew up in the woods. I grew up building forts. I grew up making traps. All right, y'all want to hear a funny story about what I did to my cousin one time? You're going to. All right, so I had watched Swiss Family Robinson. A fantastic film, a classic of Western canon. And there was a trap that was deployed within it, and the Counterweight Trap, right? Where you flip upside down. So I spent a week developing the Counterweight Trap in the woods in Iowa. So I was living there. So I built this Counterweight Trap because I knew my cousins were visiting. And so I said, you want to go see my forts? And I lead them down into the forest. I'm 10 years old. My cousin, I've got a 10-year-old cousin, 9-year-old, or 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and I think I had a 7-year-old. Now the 7-year-old, he was nice. I would have felt guilty about it. The 10-year-old's the one who I wanted to trap, but he was a little heavy, so I was a little suspicious that the log that I finally got to work up on the tree to be the counterweight to fall would actually lift him up. But I was trying to lead him towards it. But then he started going towards the punji sticks, which are basically a hole in the ground and spikes. And I was like, that's a bad idea. No, that's so when you're doing a practical joke and you're like, that's a terrible idea. Yeah, I was like that, not that direction. And then he went straight into the other tripwire, and I didn't figure out how to do the tripwire yet, so it was just the rope and the tree log. So I pushed the log off, and then it cinched around his legs and flipped him up, And so he's hanging there, but it's not quite heavy enough, and it starts sliding up his body and starts cutting him, and I'm like, oh no! So I pull out my little pocket knife and I'm sawing it, but the rope is way too strong, and he's screaming, and his other brother, who's the tattletale, is already 500 yards that way. He's like, Mom! So I'm trying to cut him down. I finally cut him down. I'm so sorry, and he's like, yeah! And then I see almost like a search party in Gone Girl or something, all the parents coming down the hill from the house towards me. Pierce, my dad yells. And I just fucking bolt to the woods. So I stay in the woods for 4 hours as they do a search party for me, and I have my dad took me to Army surplus stores, so I do face paint and stuff. So I was in my camouflage little dugout, and I'm just waiting to go home. So then I finally think, all right, the coast is clear. Idiot, right? The coast is clear. They're just gonna forget. So I'm like, all right, if I go through the garage and get to my room, I'm totally safe. They'll never find me. And I'm going into the garage. And my dad is just sitting there on his folding chair with the stack of beers beside him. He's like, son, we need to talk. So that's my origin. That's where the Institute came from. The problem is now he's a Marine, and he's about this tall, and he remembers very well. So anyway, that's a long answer, but I've never told that story. Over there in the corner. I'm shocked it took this long. So that's the next step. We've done everything else, and we're not doing press releases because I've done it before in 2014 with Universal. It was bought right off the bat. Thought I was super cool. You know, I thought, oh my God, I've just made the next big thing, and then get stuck in developmental hell. But I also got kicked off my own project. I wrote a couple drafts, and then 7 weeks later, I found out they were having another writer write it and didn't even tell me until 7 weeks later. Right? Not happening again. So I got the rights back eventually because, well, never mind. Don't want to throw anyone under the bus. I kind of do. But I got the rights back and I sat on them for 2 years while I pieced together the creative team I wanted. So instead of going to a studio, instead of selling the rights, I held on to the rights, got a director I wanted, got the writer I wanted. If you know who they are, please don't say anything because it got leaked a tiny bit. But, you know, just trying to not do that. I got yelled out at a different place. Not blaming you. And so we have basically been writing it and developing it and creating all the stuff in secret and have financing for it. So we have a studio behind us, but now we're taking it to pitch, and that'll be in the next couple of weeks. But we got the pilot where we want it. We think it's pretty awesome. So unless I fuck it up, we'll have good news. We'll have good news hopefully soon. But by the way, if I'm really quiet next time, you know I fucked it up.
So you've written a full trilogy. Now you've written number 1 and number 2. And the trilogy takes an arc. Which is the hardest to write? The center book, the first book?
They're all hard.
For different reasons.
I swear to God, every time I sit in front of a computer or the blank page, I'm like, how did I ever do this? Like, I even try to reverse engineer, like trick myself. I put all the books beside the computer and I'm like, evidence, I've done it. It doesn't help because then you're like, oh, I've done all the things I already like. You know, like what new things do I do? What new things do I discover? So basically between books, I just basically read tons of history, tons of fiction, I watch everything I can, listen to all the music, so I try to refuel the gas canister, you know? So it's basically, they're all really difficult because they all have different reasons for existing, but also it's tricky because trilogies come with a built-in understanding of what happens in each part, right? There's an understanding of that the second book is going to be the darkest, right? But I've got news for you, the third book might be the darkest than this one. Why? You know, I just want to defy expectations. Now, it's hard because I don't outline, so it's active exploration. Because I know generally what's going to happen. I know to a degree, but often I'll get to that point and find it to be untrue to the character, based on the character choice, and so I'll have to re-explore it. So for me, the fun thing is this active exploration. That's what keeps it exciting, because often when I try to do an outline, I find that instead of the characters deciding the plot's deciding for the characters, and then I hijack their internal logic in order to make it work. And I feel that that's untrue, and also it makes the tone's right, tone's off. So everything is based on vibe with me. I'd like to say that I'm some, you know, really clever architect, but a genius. Well, your words, not mine. And instead, it's much more bullshit detector. It's a vibe thing. It's finding out if it works. It's seeing how a scene comes together and seeing how then the pacing works and piecing it that kind of foundationally based on the character's inner dynamics, and then the external plot comes almost after that. So, you know, I'm not sure which is the hardest. Let me finish this next book, and maybe I'll be more authoritative, but probably not. I think a lot of it is me still deciding on so many things. I've only been writing for, I guess I started when I was 18, so I'm still new to this in the grand scheme of things, and I don't want to, even internally, I don't want to declare it because then it kind of bakes it, right? Then it's a thing I got to live up to in my own head. So I don't know.
Hi. I would like to know, what is your favorite character relationship to explore in your writing? And that can be romantic, friends, enemies, family, dead, not dead.
Yeah, Apollonius with himself. Besides that, I would say the Darrow and Severo dynamic is pretty fun. But I also really enjoyed in the first couple books the Darrow, Mustang, and EO dynamic because I looked at a lot of the books out there and I saw these love triangles. And in fact, many people, some publishing houses and studios wanted to make it a love triangle. And I was like, didn't you just see that I made a love triangle with a dead person? Because that was what I thought would be interesting is what happens then if you kill off one of the parts of the triangle before the triangle exists. Because then you're not just dealing with a capricious person I can't decide who to like. Instead, you're dealing with actual real life human themes. You're dealing with this idea of what do I owe the dead? What degree of honor is there in maintaining that connection and turning down happiness in life? And that exploration of what degree of, I guess, Darrow didn't know, and I didn't know, and I didn't know what readers would buck at. What would be a problem if they thought that he'd be spitting in EO's eye because he even felt things from Mustang. So it was very kind of walking a tightrope and exploring it and seeing if it worked. And again, like I said, vibe. So it was very tricky, but very fun to write because it resonated so much. Because I think we've all had people who have passed, and I think that the question that really matters is how much should you grieve, and then destroy your own life with that or depreciate your own life. And certainly the dead often wouldn't want that unless they're kind of assholes, But I think that it's very much that murky nature of it which makes it a fun relationship for me to look at. But good question, yeah. Also, Sarah and Devereaux, yeah. Sarah and Devereaux. Darrow and Severo. Oh my God, I've never done that before. Funny thing, so every now and then my inbox gets filled with fan fiction. A lot of it is homoerotic. Okay. Oh God, this is so funny. It almost always starts with the scene of Darrow and Severo when Darrow is confessing what he is to Severo in that scene, and then shit escalates. But it's somewhat traumatizing because I'm like, they would never. Would they?
I love your books. I've been obsessed with them for like the last 3 years.
You're pulling off a good Victor right now. Or are you Holiday?
No, I'm Holiday.
You're Holiday. Oh,
Yes.
that's Draconis 13 right there. Yeah.
So, but my question to you was, with Tactus, if Lorne hadn't killed him, do you think he would have lived up to what Darrow was seeing in him?
100%.
Yeah.
I think Tactus would have. I think oddly it would have been Lorne who disappointed us. I think
Yeah.
Lorne would have tried to kill Darrow on the spot if he knew. Whereas Tactus had been interesting. I'm on board because look at his brothers. I think the guy had a bad home life and he's not really that enchanted by gold. He's more enchanted with the people that are curious to him, are interesting. And Tactus had never been given a second chance. So that Darrow gave that to him. I think you saw how much he treated it. Then the violin thing. Oh, that got me. Yeah.
I am going to just put this out here. We're going to take 3 more questions.
No!
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Let's go.
No, make him fight for it.
So you spoke about reading a lot, watching movies. What works do you find yourself going back to over and over whenever you're stumped?
A lot of times the classics. That's a great question. I think I reread the Iliad probably once a month, not the whole thing, just sections of it. And I like different translators because it's interesting to see the different because I don't speak Greek or read Greek. So it's interesting the different translators and kind of the spin they put on it. Alexander Pope does this really beautiful translation that kind of reads like the King James Bible, but it's very kind of romantic, gristly romantic, but romantic in Byronian sense. And then there's Robert Fagles, who does more of a Vietnam type style look at it. And there's a new translation, I forget her name. It was, yeah. So it was the first wide printing of a female translation of the Iliad. And so she looks at it more as an introspective on masculinity and Greek culture. So it's getting to dive into that, what hubris means. So I reread that because it makes me think about things from different perspectives because you're rereading the same text, but with different words, and I get to see what different diction does. Also, I reread Stephen Pressfield a lot, who does really good military fiction. Dune, which I probably have like a reread, once every 2 years or so, because that's awesome. Yeah, because it's the first book that taught me about fantasy and science fiction could exist within the same book. I think I read it when I was 12 and left an impression. I think a lot about Ender's Game, but I haven't reread it in a while. But obviously, that's a pretty strong influence for the Institute. Probably the strongest influence for the Institute, besides Lord of the Flies. Those two guys could kind of go hand in hand. What else? Sophocles, because reading things with the gravity of age is a little bit different than reading it in high school. And each time I read it, I'm lent a new perspective into it. And so those are the ones that kind of get me going, because I'm not trying to emulate the way they write, because they write for a different audience in a different time period. It gets tricky when you're looking at contemporaries, because then the jealous monkey comes up and you're like, I should write just like them, And those are the ones I probably return to the most. But oddly enough, Gaelic Campaigns by Caesar, which I just adore, and Count of Monte Cristo, which I think is one of the best it's the best adventure story of all time, or one of them at least. Because it's the first time I think I saw a main character who I despised, but also was so intrigued by. Because he was just so mean to Mercedes, and I loved her. And seeing his reasoning for that and seeing his cruelty was very interesting at a young age, very affecting. Yeah. Cool.
I'm not sure what kind of response this is going to get. I've been around so many fans. One of my favorite characters is Victra. Sure why it's putting out. Okay, great. I was just wondering if you ever felt bad about betraying her so many times, because I was crushed every time.
She's still around, ain't she? I love Victra. No, Victra is one of my favorite characters as well, because she was disenchanted. I mean, she was one of the people that came over to Darrow first and has been one of his loyalist friends, and he didn't trust her a lick. And I love that he was wrong about her. And often he trusts the wrong people because he judges the wrong values. And I think Victor taught him a lot of lessons. So Victor, for me, she's also Victor's like more of a mood than a character, And so I don't feel guilty, because I think she can handle it,
All right, and this is going to be our last question. And because I'm selfish and tired, I'm going to give it right here.
Hi. My sweet baby angel is Cassius. And he does so much for the revolution, and he's one of the most dynamic characters. And you make him suffer a lot. And he is not remembered by the Republic. There are no statues of him, and I just want to know why.
Pretty boys don't get everything. Because Cassius doesn't need it or wants it, and he'll do it anyway. I love that part about him. He doesn't need that congratulations, and in many ways, him and Darrow are very similar, because Darrow doesn't need it either. He just wants to get it done. And Cassius the same way, and the fact they do it for different reasons, of course, but I love that Cassius is, all his life, he wanted to be an honorable man, and only in Iron Gold did he start deciding what that really meant and defining it for himself, because he saw all the broken honor of everyone else. And in each book, it's a stage of his understanding of honor, and it's a stage of his understanding of himself, and also the decrepit, gross, destructive nature of his society. And I don't think that it would be in the nature of the Rising to celebrate Cassius, because Cassius's family was so much in line with the sovereign, but also Cassius, killed Ares. You don't come back from that. And I like that, because no matter what he does, he's always done that. So, no. Anyway, thank you guys for coming so much. It's a lot of fun.